capture for the people who show.
There's also other options for charging. Maybe, but did you have to stop at George on the way here? No, I stopped because I was kind of testing out the charger. I need to charge the right off 11 when we get on.
What?
It's not a quick charge.
Oh, good.
I think I maybe charged like 10. Oh, yeah. So, and it doesn't tell, like, so we were telling me how much.
It doesn't have like a plastic.
It does, yeah, it does. It doesn't say, oh, who's last for what, you made it just. Yeah, so I had to get it. It's like 140 miles. Do it if I go fast. It's hard.
So your car inspired me to think that when we get our new wind generator, we should set up an electric vehicle charger.
Absolutely.
Should.
No, totally. It's no.
And that'd be great press, because then we'd be on the
Right.
map.
Get on the map.
And you could
Yes.
have info booth,
Totally.
free donation
Totally.
stand.
Let's the meantime to start here. Shannon, can you launch? Yeah, we're on. Welcome everybody to this fourth Tuesday presentation in August. And we will be talking today about why seed scale is different. It's important to position the difference and the distinctiveness of seed scale in the year 1972. Because several dynamics were happening in 1972 that define why seed scale is distinctive. First of all, there was a war going on. We have wars going on now. There was a war going on that many people in the world felt was unethical and reflected that there was something wrong happening in the world with the Vietnam War. That the Vietnam War was a demonstration of the idea of colonialism, and that the way of the Western world was being imposed. And this tied in with a whole series of economic theories that were being advanced in 1972 that had been advanced and rumbling for a half century before that. The confrontation between a government whose purpose was collective benefit, i.e. the communist philosophy, and a government that was grounded on individual rights, and the rights of individual land ownership, the rights of individual people, as demonstrated in the governmental system called democracy. So that was literally a war going on. The second thing that was happening in 1972, which is extremely important to keep in mind, is that it was the year of the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. When suddenly there was a worldwide event that said, there's something happening to our planet. And what can we do collectively and what can we do individually for the planet Earth? That was a big deal. I happened to have been privileged at the time to have written the background paper for the Rio Earth Summit on the role of mountains and mountain peoples. So I was at some level engaged in that discussion that happened at Rio de Janeiro, but I couldn't personally go to Rio because Future Generations had just been launched with the task force from UNICEF to start to think about an answer. And the most important dynamic, the third dynamic that I want to emphasize, that happened at the founding, was the leadership being taken by the United Nations Development Organization under a Pakistani economist, Mahbub al-Haq, one of the real geniuses of how to advance the lives of people, who had said that the role of economics is only partial, and we need to develop a way of understanding human development as a whole. Ultimately, at UNDP and under Mahbub's leadership, the idea of the Human Development Index comes up. So those sorts of dynamics prompted Jim Grant to give the charge to bring together some people, of which I was fortunate to be co-chair based on the work we had done primarily in China with the Tibetan extension of sustainable development through national parks. I was developed the co-chair along with my father with his role, of course, in the child survival revolution. And we had fabulous other people involved in that discussion. And from that, the seed scale was synthesized. I want to stress that what's distinctive about that synthesis, it wasn't that we as individuals was doing the synthesis. It was that we were working from the literature of what works. And we were asking everybody to say, you know, we were asking everybody to say, we want to know what you've got evidence behind. We want to know what works, what has shown to work over time specifically. And from that, the first assumption, the first conclusion was what works is to grow from the community level. And the community needs to be enabled. The community needs to be helped because on its own, communities grow. But how can they be helped and accelerated so that they can reach all? And the phrase that was guiding in those times was how to reach the unreached. So with that as an introduction, thank you all for joining today. And I want to just run through a few slides and show a couple little video clips about around the theme of why seed scale is distinctive, why it is a different approach. So the first one here, Shannon, just make sure this share is going, this opening screen, okay. The first slide I want to say is it's a framework. It's a frame for work, okay? In other words, inside the frame of seed scale, work is happening for community level analysis, okay? The second one is that work is ever improving actions. We're not doing something. Actions are always happening. They have been happening for millennia. The question and the opportunity is to fit them to values and resources that are there inside the frame, for the purpose of growing sustainably and inclusively, reaching the unreached in a way that lasts. So that's just and lasting change is where it comes. Seed scale differs. It differs in its essentiality because it offers the possibility to start where you are right now. You don't have to wait. You can start where you are right now, wherever you are, using whatever you have and using your values, not the values of what was at that time called the Washington Consensus, because the elite in Washington, D.C. had decided what was right for the world, and it was called the Washington Consensus. And it was being driven by the World Bank and a number of the international agencies. They had defined that what was to grow was to be economic development, and that from the growing the markets around the world, there would be money that would be invested in basic needs, and the whole basic needs would be answered. But what seed scale was offering was the possibility that was a different starting point, a different resource base, and was grounded in values. So seed scale is fundamentally different from the then priority as encapsulated in the Washington Consensus, basic needs approach, and the fundamental assumptions of international development. The international development was also talking about community-based approaches. but the community was the target. The community was free labor. And what we were identifying in the discussions that were being hosted at the Innocenti Palace in Florence, Italy, was causes, and that change emerges through community learning. Community learning is a fundamental thing than communities being delivered to. It's fundamental. Communities learning how to do health is different from delivering health services. That's not to say that health services don't need to be delivered, but there is the other side of the coin. Always optimizing the resources communities have access to. Communities have a lot of resources or they'd be dead. How do you optimize what they have or what they can access? And then don't deliver to your results and values, but deliver to the ones that people want. Because if people want them, then they will get on board. They don't have to be convinced that, for instance, girls must go to school. Okay, that's a wonderful objective. We're not in any way suggesting otherwise. They don't have to be convinced to eradicate poverty. That's a wonderful objective. But if that's your objective, don't force it on the people. Start a growing process that delivers results specifically fitted community by community. There is an important difference. And then the whole issue of scaling. Scaling has to happen. We're getting more and more people on Earth. But as the scaling happens, it's not one model. It's not a design. It is continually refining action. It is a different definition than what was then assumed and continues to be assumed in much of work, which is that you figured out the design. The design is always continually refining according to the community. Well, let me just emphasize that the seed scale approach does not disagree with all these other approaches. They go hand in hand. So all the economic development work is authentic, it's important, and it has reduced poverty worldwide. It's extremely exciting. So when Seed Scale is talking about its approach, it is embracing the whole role of economic development. And the dramatic evidence that this slide shows of how poverty has been reduced. The sub-Saharan poverty has gone up, as you can see, sadly, in the blue line. But the poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean has declined somewhat. That's the green line. The huge decline in poverty that is represented by the red line, which is East Asia and the Pacific, and of course the role of China and India in that is the determining factor. But globally, it's very interesting to see where poverty was reduced, and overall, except for the example of the sub-Saharan African, the poverty has come down across the world. So that's a real achievement of economic development. And another real achievement is the reduction of violence. Through war, yes, you can see that from this, of course, the Second World War, but even throughout the 60s when seed scale began to be articulated in the revolutions that were happening, freedom movements, the 80s, 90s, now in the 2000s, we have much less war in the world. Of course, there's the danger in Ukraine that is not represented and captured by this slide. The violence is also interestingly reflected and declined in domestic violence. There's less now, not as dramatic as here. There's less civil violence. We live in a less violent world, though the statistics, I'm not going to go into it, show that we are more aware of violence. Violence is less camouflaged now, which is wonderful. And now perhaps the most interesting thing is that people are living. So health services have made a difference. But more importantly, the message that I want you to all take away is that the life expectancy, while it has gone up dramatically, as shown here with all the charts, starting at about the same time that violence started to go down. The dates here are very similar. In other words, around this time of the Second War, life expectancy took off dramatically worldwide. But the number one reason is not because of health services, it's because people learned how to take care of their children. It's because, especially, of the role of mothers in taking care of the children, and the role of UNICEF was the global leader in this. And that's why Jim Grant was able to see this sooner than almost anybody else in the world, because he was leading this process through the child survival revolution that by 1990 had saved 25 million lives worldwide, and it continues to tumble to now at about 50 million. So the point I want to say is development as communities has been happening across the human experience, okay? The world's been getting better with a lot of good things, but small specific actions that were happening as the world was getting better has now created a new reality, which we call the Anthropocene. We've been cutting forests. We needed the wood. We cut the trees. We needed factories, but factories were belching smoke. We needed water for agriculture. We needed water for many other purposes. So we're depleting the world's water supply. And now only, if you combine all the living life on Earth, only 5% of all the living animals on Earth are wild anymore. Okay, chickens, people, all the domesticated animals comprise, if you call people domesticated, comprise 95% of the animal biomass on the planet. So we have created a new Earth. And we have evidence of this very dramatic progress, which we call the Anthropocene, which is the Earth that has been renamed by people, for people. The purpose of the planet now is to advance human life. And so small, specific actions growing big have brought us a lot of benefit. But we have a new reality now, which is how do we take the idea of small, specific actions going big? How do we take that idea and turn it to the positive? Okay, the small, specific actions, let's call it seed. That's called going big, scale. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to ride the engine of growth of small going big. Small actions at the community level going big, we're going to try to ride that as the engine of now a positive change. So this present that we are in, the Anthropocene, has deep uncertainties. I don't want to focus on those. I want to look at how we can take the energy of people, right? And from the energy of people, we can start to grow something better. The energies of fossil fuels used by people created the present problems, but we are future generations. The name is intentional. We're trying to generate the future by using people. We're trying to find an effective direction by people for the planet. The Future Generations mission statement is explicit and bold. Okay, we're trying to figure out this footprint of people on the planet. How do we change that direction, circling the world? And you know what, folks? We've got tiny seeds now in 43 countries with our alumni. We're tiny, tiny seeds. Okay, but as we've been getting into, tiny seeds can do big things. So here's a little bit of a clip from a video film that Bruce and I are preparing about that sort of introduces that idea. Gathering in meetings is at the center of creating human civilization. Because we don't create civilizations alone as individuals. The idea of individual well-being is part of modern life. Hard work, making an income, taking care of the family, that's individualized. But if we want to come together as people, we come together in communities. We come together as tribes. And so we have in this idea of coming together as people, the idea of community. And community in seed scale is described by functions, by two functions. Sharing something in common and the potential for acting together. So your community could be people of the same color, or your community could be people of the same work for type. You all are health practitioners. Or your community could be people of the same religion. You're sharing something in common, but when you come together with potential for acting together, then you generate the future. And we want to generate a future of hope. So our future generations process towards hope is a process of growing seeds. Because we need to get the energy. We need to get the energy to grow light. And with light, we can grow learning. How do we do that? There are 4 different ways that we can grow seeds like this to scale at such size and extent that we learn as large groups of people, we create new civilization. We generate the future towards hope. So here we have those 4 options. One is the way we got here, the growth of civilizations over millennia. Living systems, of which people are one, evolve. They grow through energy. Physical systems tend to decay through what's known as entropy. The world falls apart. Okay, so we as people, as living systems, are working in a physical environment of entropy. And so our opportunity is to apply our energies. And I'm going to talk more about this, but please, please understand that future generations end with seed scale. When we talk about human energy, we're talking about many: creativity, cooperation, and hope. It's much more than just the energy of labor. So one approach is the one we got here. Development happens. The other approach is take control, do development. This is an approach that became very popular in this communist Soviet era of centralized planning. It has been continued now by donors and by governments who design a program, a health service, an educational service. They fund it and they create and work to develop new social norms, such as the social norm of mothers in a more informed way, taking care of their children. And in this system, you work for a project. You are employed by your NGOs, such as Future Generations, to do the work and to deliver development. It works, just like Development Happens works. That is a second approach, which is the delivery of services. It requires money and authority in order to do the delivery. Then there's a third approach, which is what we call fix the problem. It's the interventionist approach, and it often works side by side with the take control. But in this case, you involve experts who get a better idea of how to fix the problem, and they introduce a design, and that then they fund it through control. And it emphasizes that what you're trying to find is the vulnerable places in a community, the needs, and then you gather the resources to fill the needs. It's like a hole. You see the hole, you go to shovel something and fill it up. And you try to get as many people partnering as possible to fill the hole. That's fix the need, fix the problem. There's the fourth approach, which is what we emphasize here, which is called emergence. That doesn't deny any of the other three, but this is the seed scale focus, which is emergence. It's the inside and the outside partnering. We're going to use the outside, whatever it is, as a partner to work and enhance the inside. What's working in the inside gets strengthened by working together. We learn to make the system work more optimally. And this idea of emergence has deep and ancient roots. Okay, and the idea is very simple. When the parts gather in certain ways, they transform. Okay, the quote from Aristotle, which is the first known quote of the idea of emergence. Okay, transformation emerges based on how the parts gathered, based on how the parts gathered. So what we're trying to do with seed scale is give guidance to the process of how parts gather in a system. Now, the example of emergence, there's a lot of it. Water is composed of two very different substances, oxygen and hydrogen. How oxygen and hydrogen gather creates a very different substance. You get a pile of materials, how you gather those pile of materials together creates a house. And the house can be this lovely hexagon that we're sitting in here at Future Generations, or the house can be in a different form. The same thing with us as people. Our lungs and our heart and our nervous system gather in a different way, and how they gather defines who we are as people. And of course, the same people can gather and be at war, or they can be at peace. And of course, that is determined by external factors. You know, if Russia's invading you, you don't have much choice, okay? But you have suddenly you emerge in a different way. So what drives emergence, what drives the new identity that is evolving, that is emerging from parts, is changing relationships. At Future Generations, the core of seed scale is changing the relationships that function in a community, improving them. And the starting point for that is to recognize that it's principles, it's values. Our relationships are determined by our values. So there's room for everybody, because everybody has their values. Don't impose your values on another. Start with the values that live there. This is not telling Afghanistan that they have to move to democracy. That wasn't their starting point. Okay, that's nothing to say against democracy, but you're bossing them around and they're going to fight you back. So you start with their values. Then you introduce a process of tasks that grows a new relationship. When you plant a field, there's a process. You plow the field, you plant the seed, you irrigate the field, you protect the field, and then you harvest. There's a standard process to grow in agriculture change. What we have found with Seed Scale is there's a standard process of 7 tasks that strengthens relationships. That's what's happening. When you do the 7 tasks, you strengthen relationships. So as the relationships start to strengthen, then we have this insight that what you need is criteria, because the change, the emerging is always new. It's not what you expect. And that leads us to work plans. So when we develop a work plan at Seed Scale, we know it's going to change. We're not following the work plan. Big difference. Many groups, they develop a work plan, they expect you to follow it. Well, how in the year 2022 do we know what it's going to be in the year 2023? So we need a work plan to assign roles. We need to be functioning with assigned roles. That's what the work plan does. But then when we're working together, framework, okay, when we're working within the frame of the work plan, the roles reassign, they reemerge, and a new growth grows on itself, okay? So again, you see a distinction, for instance, in the idea of work plan within Seed Scale from the idea of work plan as in a more, that's just engineering type of application. And what's causing the plan to grow is the emergent process rather than it's being driven, for instance, by a budget, which is still there, but it's incorporated within the whole growing relationship. And thus emergence is shaped by relationships. Now, the next point is really important. Relationships are shaped by communications. If you've got a fight going on in your family, it helps to talk about it. And that will improve what was a fight into being a working family. Communications. Communications is the intangible but essential dynamic that changes the parts, that reassigns the parts into a new emergent reality. And so in order to make communications happen effectively, we emphasize learning. Anything that is non-animate can learn. I mean, some people might say that artificial intelligence is learning. Yes, I'll go there. That's non-animate, but is it animate? Some people can say a rock learns to roll downhill. I don't know. But certainly animate, sentient beings can learn, whether it's a worm or myself. I'm sometimes at that level. And so what we have created is a learning and adapting organization. That's what Seed Scale does. Seed Scale is always creating learning, and it's always evolving adaptation from the inside to what's optimal and to what's possible. So emergence is a new mindset. It's a mindset of the inside out learning, not the outside in doing too. Not experts by money. That's not to say that this is not, we don't deal with that. Of course we deal with the outside in. We're dealing with the outside in by adapting to the outside in, incorporating the outside in. Of course, we use the experts and money. We are experts ourselves. We have an idea of how to do nature conservation. We have an idea of how to advance health. We're using those as learning curricula. And we're supporting ourselves with money that we control through budgetary allocations so that the inside thinking learns to fit the outside dynamics. And as that learning is happening, the enabling environment for that is inside values, because that's like it's the enabling context. And as that learning is happening, we're learning to optimize our partnerships. We're not trying to do it ourselves, okay? We're gathering the community together for the potential of acting together, using what's there and using what's accessible. We're optimizing. That's the mindset. It's a mindset of engaging in partnership based on values towards optimization in order to create the experience of emergence. This is exactly what a seed does in a plant. As the DNA determines how it grows, the values, and the energy is right there in the seed. The first energy that starts that growth process is right there beside and with the DNA. And then the subsequent growth from that beginning of that seed is determined by the environment. The seed is no longer in control once the seed sprouts. It's blossoming in the environment. And the better it fits that larger environment, the more it will grow. If the fit is not natural, if the fit is not good, then it requires external funding. And you artificially have to irrigate the field or fertilize the field. But when it is a good fit, it grows within the enabling environment it has. You don't ever have an either or binary choice in this world of today. You've got to make both sides of that growth process, the natural and the stimulated, work in synergy. Because to try to create it as a binary either or means you're locking yourself into the restriction of not optimizing what you have the potential for. So in seed scale, we have where to start, which is building from successes. That sets up positive directions that tend to fix themselves. And the team, you use everybody that's there, from the top, from the bottom, from the outside. And how you go forward using reality, not what somebody's opinion is, not even everybody's opinion. You try to get the best understanding of reality using evidence, because that will always be fitting you to the local. And the endpoint to which you're going is behavior change. We're all emerging together for the potential to act together. And so what seed scale is essentially is not a method. It's a system of analysis leading to action that utilizes both the internal and the external capacities. And as analysis is moving to action, it's guided by criteria. We now say there are 5. In the beginning, we said there are 7. Some of the groups that work with seed scale have more or less. The criteria must be based on your values. The 5 that are suggested here of inclusiveness, sustainability, wholes, interdependence, iteration are just part of the framework. Well, 30 years ago, I was driving through the Mount Everest National Nature Preserve in the Tibet Autonomous Region of China. It's called Chomolungma National Nature Preserve because Chomolungma is the Tibetan word for Mount Everest. And out the window, we saw this huge field of rape plants. Brilliant. We stopped the vehicle. I said, this is great. We jumped out and we went and talked to the person. We looked at the plants. And yes, they were rape plants growing from rape seeds at this elevation of 15,000 feet. Roughly 4,000 meters. And I immediately connected in my mind, isn't this interesting? Because these rape seeds are capturing the sunlight. So there's a lot of energy that these rape plants are capturing. And that energy is being condensed into the rape seeds. Well, 2 years ago, I drove back through that same area, and I've been going through. It's the main highway between Lhasa and Kathmandu in Nepal. And those fields that had rape plants growing for their seeds, those fields are now growing barley and growing potatoes. In other words, fields that were once capturing the sunlight so the sunlight could be squeezed out of these seeds, those same fields are now growing food for people to eat. so that the nutrition, the food security has all gone up because those food fields are now producing food. And they don't need the rape seeds anymore because they're getting their electricity from photovoltaic panels. A photovoltaic panel has lots of tiny pixels on it. And each tiny pixel on the big panel is capturing sunlight, condensing that into the pixel. The electrons go into a battery and it's stored in the battery, and people at night turn on this light switch and their homes have light. That's more light, easier than having to grow the rape plant, squeeze the seeds, and then burn a wick in the oil. But it's actually the same process, where sunlight is being condensed into the rape seed, or where sunlight is being condensed into a photovoltaic panel, and then it goes on to give illumination at night. Well, because the quality of life has improved for the people who live in the middle of a nature preserve, they've moved from being the second poorest county in all of China, Dingri County in the Tibet Autonomous Region of China. They've moved from being the second poorest into being middle class in Chinese society. And of course, middle class today in China is a lot better off than middle class it was 30 years ago. So the people are better off. They're better off economically, they have food security, they have better health. They have advanced. But what's interesting and important is that those fields and those villagers that once were poor are very similar to these experiences we have here at the headquarters of Future Generations, where we're in the middle of a nature preserve. It's called the Monongahela National Forest. And half the land is being used for traditional agriculture. And half the land, as you can see, is being protected for the watershed, for the biodiversity, for the trees. So that the people's land here is being used to improve the quality of their life and to protect the environment for the whole planet. And the same thing is happening at the highest place on Earth, Mount Everest. For the highest need that we as people have, which is to develop new ways of sustainable living that are partnering people and nature, that are partnering with our governments, whatever they might be, that are giving us a future that has a rising quality of life. Now, in the Tibetan area of China, where this all began, we also began a new type of conservation programs to save one of the most endangered animals then on the planet, the snow leopard. The people were killing snow leopards to sell their pelts. Today they're not. They've learned how to live with the snow leopard and their sheep that are run on their fields, and to protect their sheep through fencing and corrals and a whole approach. And the partnership approach that began in the Chomolungma National Nature Preserve in Tibet in Dingri County, where the rapeseed picture that I just showed you was taken. That partnership approach extended across the international border into the Sagarmatha National Park on the Nepal side of Everest, and its adjacent Makalu Barun National Park that Future Generations personnel partnered with the government and the communities in creating. It extended into 5 different nature preserves in Nepal. It went north into Ladakh in India. It went north beyond Ladakh, that community-based approach, into Kazakhstan and Mongolia. So now the snow leopard is no longer endangered, it's considered vulnerable. We as people are vulnerable today. Our way of living is vulnerable. If we don't do something now, we as people and our way of living is actually endangered. So let us take this lesson that came from the tiny, tiny rapeseed the mustard seed. Let us remember the teachings that came from our religious traditions. If you're Islamic, if you're Christian, if you're Judaist, if you're Buddhist, all of our religions have celebrated the importance of the tiny mustard seed. It is at the center of the growth of civilization for thousands of years. It is our human energy now that we can learn to reprogram, to get new behaviors, to partner with nature, to address the highest need that the humans and that all species have. So from this mustard field at the middle of the Chomolungma Nature Preserve and the lessons that we've learned about partnering that are being extended through future generations' educational programs, we have some hope to move not from vulnerability towards being endangered, but to move from vulnerability towards sustainability and inclusion of all. Thank you very much. So in conclusion, I just want to emphasize that what seed scale is and why it's distinctive is it's a system. It's not just a method. It consists of many methods that create a framework, a frame for work of community level analysis. And the analysis leads to ever improving actions that are fitted to local values and resources, with the consequence of the ability to keep on growing sustainably and inclusively. That's why seed scale is distinctive. I don't know any other approach that does this, that comes even close to this. And this was a synthesis, not that was made by future generations. This is a synthesis that has been made and grown by experimental trials that began in scholarship and research and studying the literature, and that we all right now are continuing to grow. So thank you to everybody who has been part of that growth process. For me, it's been extremely exciting to share this with you all for the last 30 years. I was lucky to have been doing it since it was taught to me by villagers that I grew up with in India and mentored by my parents. And in my academic studies with inspiring faculty such as Paulo Freire or Adam Curl or David Kinsey. To be working with colleagues such as Rita Tapa, who took a young guy in his 20s, and Rita, who's now on our faculty, maybe even on this lecture, taught me how to listen when I thought I had the answers. So Rita, if you're listening, big thanks, Dhanyavad, and thank you to everybody worldwide who's been working with me. Rita's on. So Rita, Dhanyavad. And I now turn it over. We have 10 minutes in case anybody would like to comment or speak or correct. Thank you very much. Rita? Yeah, I saw that. Rita, it's over to you, please. DDG, bonus.
Daniel, I loved listening you. It took me to all these years we worked together, and you are so refreshing. You brought the present and past and future all in fusion, you know. It is such a wonderful fusion that I loved it. And I listened every word you said with your enthusiasm, with your usual enthusiasm, and very inspiring. I am more inspired now, you see. Thank you, Daniel. It was really precious for me. And I'm leaving tomorrow early morning to catch a flight to go to, you know where? Lomanthan.
Very exciting. Friends, Lomangtang is one of the most beautiful pilgrimages in Nepal. So Rita, Bistare Janos, be careful. And what an honor to have worked with Rita since,
Yeah.
in my case, since 1968.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I've been cautioned by everyone. And, this is the monsoon season, lot of landslide. I'm flying to Pokhara tomorrow. And from there, I will assess the situation.
Okay.
And thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you very much. Any other comments first from the participants that are maybe logging in from different parts of the world? Feel free to jump in if you would like. Any comments from anybody here in the room? Turn on your mic if you want to speak. I would like to thank Luke especially, who is sitting at the table here. We thank him as the lead acknowledgement in the empowerment book. He takes first, but Luke has been very working with this whole process. When I say 30 years, Luke has a special challenge because he grew up with it. So Luke, in case you would like to comment.
Not really anything particular at this time, other than just what I tend to tell people all the time, which is that, and I think you articulated well in this presentation, which is that if you really want to understand seed scale, if you really want to do seed scale, it can't just be a formula. It can't just be a set of steps. It's not a recipe. It's something that really needs to be internalized first and foremost. I mean, when you go to that final thing of behavior changes the outcome. Well, that can mean so many different things. I mean, humans change their behaviors all the time. So being very intentional around that, I think is a really key piece. And, I was just trying to describe seed scale as where most approaches are designed to be an exclusive method of kind of where their approach stops and another one begins. Seed scale by definition is an inclusive method. And so therefore it's, if you're doing something that seems very much like seed scale, we're gonna suck it into our ethos. We're gonna learn from it. We're gonna, and because it's really just a process of getting people to come together around what works.
Thank you very much, Luke. We are basically at time. If anybody else wants to jump in with a comment, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, let me say thank you. I'll wait just a few seconds in case somebody else wants to jump in. Hearing none, thank you very much, everybody. The next presentation is in fourth Tuesday of September. Shannon, remind me who's presenting. Oh, Rupen Dang, please, from Delhi. Yes. Go.
Hi, Daniel. Good morning to you. Well, that was a bunch of very, very stunning statistics you came up there. Very, very frightening and inspiring, such as the one about 5% of all animals are wild. I had no idea that's a shocking statistic, really, about the 5% animals being wild. And several of the other things. And I didn't realize, till you really look at those graphs, how life expectancy has more than doubled and how deaths from wars have come down. So I guess it's not all gloom out there. There are the bits of good news, and I think that's what you all try and focus on, some of the good and the bad, and trying to reconcile the bad with the good and focus on the good things that need to be done. So keep on, soldier on, and good listening to you there.
Rupen, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, Rupen is the newest member of the Board of Trustees of the university and is a very esteemed filmmaker in India, and we've used his work a lot. But Rupen, since this is your first time with the Future Generations Global team, let me take this opportunity to enthusiastically welcome you and say how happy we are that you're on the board.
Thank you. And I'm calling from the mountains here. It's lovely monsoony up at Jabarkhet and Landor And it's clear. And yesterday, after very, very heavy rainfall 2 days ago, I could actually see the Ganga from the window. From up in Landor, you could see the Ganga. Have you ever seen the Ganga from Landor?
I've never seen the Ganga from Landauer, but the interesting thing, Rupen, is that on this call right now is Robert Fleming.
Oh,
Who,
wonderful, wonderful, Mr. Fleming.
So he certainly knows where Jabbokate is, and he certainly knows the
Yes.
views that you have.
Wonderful, Mr. Fleming. Good to know that we are on the same call, and look forward to meeting some of you folks soon, I hope. Thanks a lot.
Colleagues, if there's anybody else, please speak up. Otherwise, we will wrap this up. Jean-Marc, if you want to pitch in. Oh, pardon me. Next month, we have the presentation at the fourth Tuesday. Very interesting presentation from Jean-Marc, who's one of our students from Haiti, and will be describing his role of how the Future Generations Master's degree has helped him learn how to work with communities in Haiti. So I welcome each of you back a month from now to hear Jean-Marc's story of his personal learning journey in Haiti, which is an extremely challenging context. And so thank you very much for joining today. And we look forward to you joining us again in a month. Bye-bye.